Welcome to the Heartbreak to Happiness Show with Sara Davison. If you're struggling with a breakup and you feel shocked, angry, betrayed, devastated, or sad and alone, then this podcast is for you. Best-selling author and award-winning host Sara Davison shares how you too can get on with your life to heal, grow, and move from heartbreak to happiness. Here's your host, Sara Davison.
Welcome back to the show. Now today, my guest is Baroness Helen Newlove. Helen is relatable, real, and inspiring. Just a few words I would use to sum up the Parliamentary peer, campaigner, and former Victims Commissioner. On the 12th of August, 2007, Helen's world fell apart when her husband, Gary, was fatally attacked by a gang of teenage yobs on the family doorstep. Known for her warm and approachable nature, Baroness Newlove is a renowned keynote and after-dinner speaker, having spoken before the United Nations, government committees, and regularly in the House of Lords in the UK. Her life-enhancing speeches leave audiences transfixed. Helen's message is always one of courage, determination, and hope, as she describes how she fought tooth and claw for justice and spurred on her loving daughters to strive in the face of adversity. So I am super excited to welcome Baroness Helen Newlove to the show. Welcome, Helen. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello, I'm really delighted to have this. I love chatting, so I'm really looking forward to our session together.
Oh, thank you so much. It's going to be fantastic. Now, obviously, I know all about your story, and a lot of the episodes we're doing in this series too are talking about pain to power. And boy, have you had your fair share of pain. It's such an inspiring story. For those people who aren't sure, Helen, what you've been through, please, would you share what's happened to you?
I could talk for hours about other things as well. But yeah, in 2007, I unfortunately lost my late husband, Gary Newlove. He went out to see what antisocial behaviour was going out, damaging my next door neighbour's front garden. She was a young woman on her own. Her husband had gone working away. And he left that door and never came back in the house, because what had happened in the meantime, my daughters had heard all these noises and they'd run out with him as they always do. We're a very close family. And he'd walked in to a gang, really, a gang of people. He was a third attack on the night of this gang, which we found out after the event. But basically, they kicked and punched him to death. It's something that you see on films, but you never think you'd go through yourself. And of course, on films, on video games, you can stop that, can't you? And that's what it felt like when Amy came in to ask me to go out and to phone the emergency. It was kind of blurry, emergency services. And I thought, what am I phoning the emergency services for? And then I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble, phoning them up. And I went out, and that's when completely our life was completely torn apart, where Gary was on the floor. He'd been attacked by these youths, kicked, and he'd only asked one simple question: who damaged the garden and my car? He was barefooted. It was summer's evening. And, you know, my daughters were working on his body. He was on CPR, pulling his tongue out, it was covered in blood. And it was just one of them occasions where you think, no, I'm going to wake up in a minute. And our life completely changed. And, you know, I call my daughters my heroines now, because to see what pain they were going on that night to try and help the dad, who had been viciously kicked in the back and his head. And when the ambulance arrived, it was just absolutely, I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And then I went to the hospital, and 48 hours later, I had to turn his life support machine off, because his brain was just dangling. There was no connection, was by a tiny, tiny bit. The brain's very clever. And even though when they put him on a life support machine, I thought he was fighting the ventilator, it wasn't actually what they were concerned about, because it wasn't his brain. And they said it was, you know, he was hemorrhaging while we were there. His brain, he's just bleeding internally on the brain. So the sad thing as well is that he was in there for stomach cancer at 32, and he was in the same intensive care unit. He thought then he was going to die, because Gary wore glasses and they took him off him and he couldn't see. and he didn't believe it wasn't me crying because he'd heard somebody crying. And that's what broke my heart as well, to think, all them years later, he'd fought so hard to get, stomach cancer is very aggressive, and he lost his way that way. So yeah, I would never wish anybody to have to do that. It's just immense, to think hands and feet can do that. It's just, I just cannot even today contemplate in my hand how you could do that.
I mean, it's just shocking and so unexpected, completely out the blue. How old were your daughters at the time, Helen?
At the time, Amy was 12, Danielle was 15, and Zoe was 18. And, for me to have to, how they coped, it was kind of, I became the child when I ran out, and they became the mothers. And they were completely brilliant on the night. You just don't think it can happen. And the violence, the level of violence that they saw was horrific.
Yeah.
And as I say, Gary just asked one simple question. And even the chaplain in the hospital, who I have recently met actually, with my mum was in hospital, he had to walk away. He was so upset and angry, and that's a man of the cloth. The staff were in tears. So it showed you the depth of his injuries and everything. He was too ill to be moved to the Bolton head injury ward. It was too much for him to move. Even moving him around the corner was very dangerous for his, the situation. So it was very, very awful 48 hours to go through, and just, I just wanted him to live.
Oh goodness. Well, thank you for sharing that. I can't imagine how painful it is just to tell that story again, and the pain and trauma you went through, and your daughters.
Yeah.
So, I mean, thank you. So sharing that story, obviously, the pain is immense, the trauma and the fallout from that, just the shock, as well as the grief going through that, and the huge life change suddenly you're all thrown into. What got you through those early days? You talked about your daughters turning into the mothers. How else did you cope? How did you get through those early days?
If I'm really honest, I think it was a blur. Your body just goes into a coping mechanism, but you're not really there. It felt much, that everything was going on around me. Of course, my sister was great. All the family were great. Because, all the meantime, while I'm in hospital, my daughters had to be, they had to take the clothes off for DNA, for evidence. They were interviewed constantly. And of course, then there's the court procedure in the back. And it was just immense in a sense. I couldn't sleep, so the doctor gave me some sleeping tablets. You're just on like walking in jelly, if you get my meaning.
Mm-hmm.
It's because it was national and global headlines. There was lots of people coming in and out, and I think my background of working in the courts helped to a degree, but it's definitely not what you read in the papers. It's constant, because at the side of that, I've got 3 daughters who, they're looking at me for help, and they're worried about me, and vice versa. And they had to give, ID parades. The system was terrible. They call Viper parades. So it's not, you see, just like we are, headshots. And they were grieving as well. They'd just lost their father. So for me, it was just a blur of in and out. And I have to say, you get all the hierarchy coming in. The chief constable comes in. But I do remember I didn't give them any, I'd give him what for, because we'd previously to losing Gary, the community was suffering from lots of antisocial behaviour. People were urinating up your fences. It was horrendous. And it was a lovely neighbourhood. I've been there since I was 18, and we'd moved there to really help my mum and dad. But the level of antisocial behaviour was just escalating. So there was a community group set up, which I didn't go with Gary. I went with my neighbour and Eric, and we went to all these meetings, and it's just, you go from a whiteboard to a white piece of paper. You've got people saying young people have got nothing to do, but they're setting fences on fire, everything like that. And people are working hard to, your car was damaged every weekend, and Gary was forever pacing up and down. And the last event, it was just ridiculous. And I said, nothing will happen until somebody, loses their life. It's a murder. And little did I know. So for me, it was, it was just a blur. So to have all these heads of agencies didn't wash with me, because it was too little too late. But the support of the Warrington people was tremendous. I didn't know them, they didn't know me, but the amount of support I got from them, it was just amazing, and that'll never leave me, really. That was at the best that you could see people who were there to help and support you.
And that sometimes is one of the silver linings of these scenarios, that you see so many people coming forward, and even friends that you sort of know but don't know that well step forward. I know during my own situations over the years with the divorce and other things that I've been through, people sometimes step up and really surprise you, and you don't expect, and that means a lot, doesn't it? That support from even total strangers can actually help. We just get through
amazing, from from elderly people. And we're going about the Royal Mail now, but I got so many letters from people, and I cannot thank them enough, because they were strangers, but the words meant that you weren't on your own. Even though you have family support, it's just that added on, the family support. And of course we had family liaison officers who are now good friends. And I have to say, fabulous with the girls, because the girls never believed me. They thought, oh, mum's protecting us, it's not whatever. But actually, they would listen to Chris. And for me, that was so important for the girls to feel that, I wasn't keeping them out of the picture and protecting them. It was actually the process.
Yeah. And what happened with the justice behind all this? How did you get justice for your case? And have things changed now in the community, do you feel?
That's an interesting question, actually, because, there was many court hearings. There were juveniles. They'd had to ram raid a house round the corner from where we live. That's where they all were, and covered in blood. So you learnt lots of things. But I never went to the court because I gave a witness statement, but family went, and even for them it was surreal, because it was youth. You just couldn't imagine it. But I've had faith in the justice system. I'd worked in the justice system, so I knew the process, and the police were very, very good. But it's when it comes to you sitting there and having no control, and it's just unbelievable, because we were told how to behave. My girls had to give evidence. So we had to give evidence. She was treated as an adult because she's 18. So she gave evidence, but with screens around her. But if them defendants could have got in the box with her, they treated like they'd gone to the pictures. And my daughters gave evidence, my two young ones, but I couldn't go and give them a hug. I couldn't actually say, you'll be fine. They went in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we got to 3:30 before they came to Amy, who was 12. She was traumatized, grieving. Her sisters had left her because they can't go back in because they've given evidence, and they might persuade her to say something. And that it got quite late, and I have to say, the judge was wonderful, and he did say that, is it too late for Amy? Shall we get it out of the way? But he'd only ask me, but I was made aware by the police officers that the defence could object to her coming home, because we'd seen the evidence in the court. I just thought this was bonkers, and I would have done contempt of court, because she was absolutely, she hadn't slept for months on end.
Yeah.
And these are the bits you don't see within the courtroom. And in the end, we did adjourn, but you just cannot, that human side's lost. There's legal arguments, and I have to say, before the court started, there was legal arguments where I was suicidal, because I just felt it was a circus. I talked to Gary's Ashes, and I just said, we're letting you down, and we had to move house. So there was a lot of other stuff going on that the justice system doesn't pick up. It's a process that you have to follow. And of course, victims, the families don't have any legal representation for themselves. It's a prosecutor, but who's not there for you, he's for the state. So I was amazed, because obviously I had true faith and worked in it, as to how very little, without, family officers or whatever giving the right communication, you have very little support within the criminal justice system.
I think these are great points, because they're things that people don't really think about behind the scenes. You see it playing out on the news, but you don't actually see what's going on behind the scenes. So, gosh, yeah.
No, and it's also the practical skill, the practical side of it, Sarah. You still got to pay your bills. Gary was the main breadwinner. None of that is paid. And if you got your own home, it's not like the council or benefits will kick in and help you. You've still got to pay what you do, and I'm not saying the companies weren't very they were very empathetic to what was going on. But that's the practical side of it, and the girls' education was lost because they were struggling as well. So all that is going on. We had a 10-week court trial. And so it was horrific. It was horrific for people not to see that other side of, just what they see in the papers.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really interested in, having gone through all that pain, all that trauma, which is dragged out obviously through the court process, and then being a mum to 3 girls who obviously are still recovering as you are and supporting them through this. Was there a defining moment where you said, you know what, I'm going to harness this and I'm going to use this to do good? Or was that a slow process? But I mean, I know you went from, you describe yourself as a shy housewife, and now you're, a campaigner, you're very vocal, you've achieved so many amazing things, as I talked about in the bio when I introduced you, that there's such a long way you've come. Was there a defining moment where that was came to you, or was this just progress over a period of time?
I think it was a progress of time and being very lucky, in a sense of I didn't have a vision, and it only really hits you, which we've just recently had the young girl in Liverpool case that's come to the fore, and it always makes me, you see about it, but once the court case and the sentencing and everything else is over, it's the loneliest place to be in, because that's when you shut the door, that's when everybody goes away, and that's when your life has to begin. And for me, it was people saying, what do you want to do? Do you want to do anything? And the press officer at Cheshire, Jackie Hanson, was brilliant, because obviously media were interested to do documentaries. And it was the next day when Sky News were looking at gangsters and everything. And if you've got a question, so, my sister said, why don't you send a question in? And then I became headline news. And then Jackie said, what have you done? I said to the press, you're very quiet, you need time. And I said, well, so I had no vision. What I did have is that I needed the focus to be on what I always said, and I did say, that Gary would never be a statistic, because the human side in our criminal justice system isn't there. It's very, very hit and miss. And the damage and the trauma can be re-traumatizing within that system. So for me, thankfully, Warrington Walls Foundation helped me to launch Warrington, Newlove Warrington. The girls did the logos. So it kind of progressed from that. And I made documentaries because I wanted to understand why this was happening. Why was, it was alcohol then and antisocial behaviour. And so I did want to do my homework on that. And I was very honoured, very privileged to be able to do that. But there does come a time when you think, well, where do I go with this? I've never opened a charity, never done this. I'm a legal PA. And I knew I didn't want to open a charity because that's a lot of work to do. But I also had to think about, well, I'm the main breadwinner, and you can only do so much for so much. And it's either, do I go back to the old style, or how do I go it? And I'm very fortunate, because during that time, I received an email from David Cameron. I'd had communications from Gordon Brown, and then I got an email from David Cameron, who I thought, why would he email me? And so I reported him to Cheshire Police. Actually, I said to Jackie, somebody's portraying to be David Cameron, who wasn't, he wasn't Prime Minister then, he was in opposition. So this is not, somebody's doing something. And it turned out to be, actually, it was David Cameron. It was a private email address. So that's how we started our friendship. I'm very open and honest to him, and I think he laughs at me because I'm quite straightforward. And so so that's where I came in the politics side. But the one thing I wanted to do for the girls was a radio station, because Gary was a DJ, loved music, and they loved it. And I was very privileged to be able to work with the community in Warrington, open Newlove FM, and work with the students at the college. We got mobile DJ decks and everything like that. And we, for Newlove FM was on for 2 weeks on the air, because it's very costly for radio licenses and everything.
Yeah.
And so that gave some energy to the girls, so we did the breakfast show. We had lots of college students coming in making cakes, and it was fabulous. We had some of the professionals from the radio stations So, you know, I think it just progressed, and I was very lucky to have that support behind me and people with experience to support what we wanted to do, because it did hit the nation. It did, you know, Amy's letter that she wrote while Gary was in hospital. You know, we were going on holiday and she said, you know, I'll put the sun cream on Dad because he was a sun worshipper. I just need you to get better and I'll look after you and everything. I think that really touched the nation. So, you know, but it did come to a crossroads where I thought, I'm going to have to go and get, you know, a really back to normal. But I knew I couldn't do that. And I was fortunate that David Cameron asked me to take a seat in the House of Lords, and that's when it completely changed again.
Yeah. So what opportunities did you get from there? Because you've had so many achievements over the years. What do you feel your biggest achievements, and is that how they were open to you with the House of Lords?
The House of Lords I was fascinated about because I love law and I always wanted to be a barrister, but I never got to it. I could never do that kind of mat work. I suffer from fibromyalgia, so it's fatigue is always the big hitter. But I think when I went in there, I had, at first I did feel an imposter. I felt that, you know, I don't speak with a plum in my mouth. You know, you read all the books, you see everything in the robes, and I just thought, oh, this is, you know, they're going to stop me any minute and say, you know, you're not around, you're from here. But actually, you know, it's the most amazing place to work in, the most respectful place to work in, and we're all from different well sides and, you know, everything across the country in politics. But, you know, I've learned so much from so many people. And I get so passionate about the House of Lords now. On the negative press of it is that I'm very grateful to David Cameron to give me that opportunity. But yes, I've got a title. I'm a peer in the House of Lords, but that doesn't give you, you know, at that stage I was one of the young ones, but you know, it doesn't give you a salary. I've still got to pay a mortgage, you know, and everything. So there is this perception that, you know, we're cracking on, and I just said, I need a job. I can't, very nice, but there's no way I can come into London. I couldn't find, you know, I couldn't afford to do that because I need to have an income to be able to bring up, you know, and look after my daughters. And so the antisocial behaviour champion was given to me because, you know, I'd gone through the experience, the advice, and antisocial behaviour and alcohol was a big problem across the country in 2010 when David became Prime Minister.
Yeah, it was huge. And then obviously you went on and became the Victims Commissioner as well. Tell us a little bit about that role, because that is something that is just so inspiring for so many people.
Yes, I'm very, you know, I was very passionate, and I think we've all got a purpose in life. It's just being able to find that purpose at some stage. Where I think we've got so many layers to us that we don't use a lot. We're very lazy with the brain, aren't we? So if you think about it. But I think for me, it was once I learned about the process in the House of Lords, and it is about learning, it's about listening. For me, there was always this issue about victims, and also a lot of colleagues would ask, oh, well, how come you're in the House of Lords? You know, what's your background? And you get a mentor in the House of Lords who was Baroness Morris of Bolton, and who was a friend. And she was behind me one day, one with this, I think it was an ex-Home Secretary many years ago. And I said, oh, you know, my husband was murdered, antisocial behaviour. And it's kind of like, it's to stop a conversation, doesn't really make, oh, right, okay, well, how do you respond?
Yeah.
You know, and I just felt this nudge in my back. And she said, if I hear you saying that once more, she said, yes, that's your journey and part of it, but it's here because of your voice. So, you know, I'm not having this. It's because of what you've done. It's what Helen's done. And so from that day on, you know, that did flip it to be it. So victims were, you know, I could hear a lot of people saying about victims. There was nobody there accountable. And the Victims Commissioner role was made just before Gordon Brown stood down. And Louise Casey was actually the first one, who's now Baroness Casey, actually, in the House of Lords. But she'd left that post to do troubled families. And so I was passionate that, you know, victims were left again. And so I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And I applied for the role when it came available. And, you know, when you say to your kids or anything, oh, when you go for an interview, you're as good as anybody. You go in there with your head held high. It's different with civil service, how there's like 5 of them, you know, and all from experience. And you've got a 5-minute presentation and you can't go off it. It was so pressurized. I have to say that once it finished, I went across the road where there's a pub and had the biggest glass of wine going, and I said,
I love it.
yeah. So, I was 50 and thinking, oh my God, I'm dying here. But yeah, so, for me, that was an honor. I had to set up an office because there was no office. So I learned about setting up a team. So that took 3 years of fighting and challenging, and, you're not going to treat me like it's anything. And finally, the last 3 years in my post, because you can only do 2 terms, I was there 7 years in total, was really fascinating to get in and get into the nitty-gritty of it. It's a privilege to have been a victims commissioner, and I still look after victims now. But yeah, to do that role was amazing, to learn about, being reports, talking to the heads of agencies, going into the Royal Courts of Justice, in the offices, talking to Lord Chief Justice. Also, I've been in the Royal Courts of Justice as, fighting for Gary on appeal. So I've seen it from both angles. Yeah. And changing how ministers look at policy of victims, to looking at the Victims Code, to work on that. Very important that they make their statements, which we hear more of now, victim impact statements. So for me, there's little things that I'm proud of: criminal injury compensation, tribunals for mental health, get their victims impact statements there. So it's been a journey of really being privileged to speak to a lot of victims. And then the most really recently is working on the domestic abuse bill and fighting to get non-fatal strangulation on the face of the bill, because it's such horrific what happens, and it's just overlooked, because mostly women in domestic abuse relationships do not realize they've been strangled. It's only when they further down the line, either they die from a stroke or a blood clot to the brain, or they then have problems with their bladders and bowels, and it's never then treated. It's only treated as an assault in a court. So now it is part of the rule of law, and it's got its own charge, and perpetrators are being charged with that, because it's horrific what they do as a control to the victim.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a huge step forward. And I think, domestic abuse now is, obviously it's something that's very close to my heart as well. And there's so many areas of this that need light shining on it, aren't there? And it has been a struggle, I think. I campaign as well, and behind the scenes, sometimes we put things forward and letters don't get answered, or they're pushed aside, or with all the changes anyway in the cabinet recently, it's very hard to get progress. So absolutely, hats off to you.
It's very frustrating, and I quite agree with you. We've got reshuffles, we've got everything, and it's like, you do 10 steps forward and 50 back, and it was a challenge. And I did have to call a vote in the House of Lords, and and I'm a Conservative peer, so it's a big thing to do. But I was put in the House of Lords for the voice and the victims I represent, and that's what David actually said to me. I want somebody like you in there. That is, true. So I've always kept that, and politics is completely different. But I think politics is, it begins with P, and I think that's for people. It should never be just about policies, and legislation is for the professionals to pick up. It's about delivering them actions to make people feel safe in their own homes. We've got economic domestic abuse. It's not just domestic abuse. It rips people's lives up, and the brutality of it all is just absolutely horrendous. And to them survivors that have given the time to tell me their story, they're true heroines themselves, because it's, everybody presumes, well, they go back. Well, it's not just going back. It's absolutely, where would you like them to do? That there is, there's children, it's their home. What are they supposed to do? And so I'm really proud, and there was a team behind me. And only I think it was 2 weeks ago, that there was a launch for the Institute of Non-Fatal Strangulation, which is similar to the one that they have in America. And so really proud, because there's a lot of work still to do on that and research. But at least now we have it, we have a legal duty now to recognise that as an injury in domestic abuse.
So inspiring. Your story is just incredible, and the changes you're making are real, and they are benefiting women around the country. So, thank you so much for turning that into your power. Having been through so much trauma, Helen, how are you now? Are there things that you still, do you have support, and were there things that have really helped you deal with the trauma? Because trauma can reside in the body for quite a while. So obviously I know you've moved on, you're happy now, and you've remarried, and your daughters are doing well. Tell us a little bit about how you manage that, because I know a lot of people listening will be thinking, gosh, how has she managed to deal with that process?
I mean, I'm not saying it's been easy, and I think we can all, if we represent somebody, we can always push that person. When it comes to us as an individual, we're still very cagey. We don't know what to do. I find this as my therapy, and I still get very angry. We've got a long way to go. The justice system is not fit for purpose, and and everything's now blamed on the pandemic. But actually, there was issues before the pandemic. We're now seeing everybody erupting. That the legal people are going on strike. It just doesn't work. And for me, at the end of all that, victims are not having their voices. We're not giving confidence to do that. So for me, I find that, that's my therapy, how I deal with it through my trauma, because my trauma is inside, but it also powers me, energizes me to actually go out there and say, this is not right, this is not acceptable. And, we've got lots of agencies that are still not doing what they're supposed to do. And then to be fair to them, the government have cut them right back. And I just find at the moment that, it doesn't sit well with me that, we're getting all these statements, which are absolutely got no depth to them whatsoever. And the amount of money may seem a lot to a lot of people, but when you dissect it, it doesn't mean a lot to the volunteers and to the charities. We've still got police inspectorates finding huge amounts of faults, and I go around and people email me and they've not had the basic rights that they're supposed to do. And they're still investigating victims are still investigating their own cases. And I just think it's, how come we can take like a jumper back to Marks and Spencer's and think nothing twice of getting a credit or whatever against something else. But when it comes to actually something that's so horrendous, it takes, it's really, apart from giving your DNA, you really are up against it all the time. So for me, it's, where have we lost that in society? So yeah, I'm very lucky. I have remarried, and and my girls are my priority, and they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, all of them. But at the end of the day, I think if they see mum doing what she's doing, it gives them hope as women individually, not to lose faith, because they were children when they listened to the legal system. Now they're women, and now they're having a voice and saying, I don't understand it. And for me, I just think society as a whole, we need to value life. We never value human life, and it's never valued within the court system. It's always about giving the offender a second chance. But when you take an individual's life through no fault of their own, that seems to be dismissed. And I think it's the wrong way around, because if we don't value humanity, we don't value the system that's there to protect us, doesn't value that, well, we're up against nothing then, because it's a matter of just evidence. And as long as we can prove it, the barristers from one to the other, they've done their job. But actually, that's wrong, because it can happen to anybody. And life is precious, and we should make it the best we can. And we should recognise if you take a life, you're not going to get a slap on the wrist.
Absolutely. Powerful words, Helen. Powerful and so inspiring. I know that you're now doing your own coaching business, which I'm very excited about, because I think, and especially the name of it. So share a little bit about that so people know what you're doing, and also how we can find that and get in touch with you on that.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that. I'm doing my pro vice chancellor at the University of Bolton. I love working with my students, and I think it was during the pandemic where you look at life, and we're all sat and thinking, because it's a hectic, packing cases. I'm constantly in London, 13 years of it, and it made me realise, and Sarah, you're probably the same. We just do these things. We just, because we're passionate about it. We it's hard some days, but other days you get back up and you really are determined. And it made me realise how much I'd achieved personally. When you look back at this and people look in and say, I remember this, or you've written a book and all this, I think, oh my God, I've actually done it. I've done this. And I mean, to bring this all together, and I want to now become a coach to help other women who, you know, whatever in corporate, because I think the pandemic has made us all realise, and I think there's an area of women, you know, 40 plus, that, you know, you've got life, you've got either had to give up, you know, for bringing your children, or you've just not had them opportunities to be what you want to be. And the system always puts us in age groups, doesn't it? You know, if you don't fit the age group or you don't fit the intelligence, oh, you know, we'll abide it. And I think it's breaking away from that, you know, I don't want anybody to go through trauma, but I think it's not just, I don't want to just deal with trauma. I just want people to know that you've got so much power within you, that, you know, from the day we're born, really, we've got this energy that, you know, the universe gives so much power to us. But because the system kind of has us leading like sheep, or, you know, you don't follow it, and that's where the class divide and everything like that, it's about bringing, enhancing all that, you know, the goodness in within it. And I want to help women to look at their vision, what they want to do, and if they feel they can't do it, well, actually you can if you follow this formula. You just allow yourself to breathe and do it at your pace, because the words of advice I got when I went to the House of Lords was, take small steps. Because what it can do, it can vacuum you in, and it takes all that passion, that energy, and actually you lose sight of it. That's why they call it the Westminster Village. And that's the one thing I've never done. I've never believed I'm better than anybody. I'm believed, you know, I'm honoured, but it's a job. I wasn't there just to sit and do nothing. And that's why I became a deputy speaker, was to learn about legislation. But it's also to inspire people that have never had that support. So, you know, as a coach, a leadership coach on personal development, we have skills, and I've been there, I've seen it. And as you say, you know, pain is power. Our scars, our wounds make us reflect, and actually I can do this. But the only way I can do it is getting support, and maybe listening and helping, and just giving you that open doorway as I've been given. So that's what I want to do. So The Mouse That Now Roars is the title of my coaching.
I love that, The Mouse That Now Roars.
Yeah, and that to me is really reflects who I am today, in that it was from before we lost Gary. I was very, believe it or not, very quiet. You know, don't get me wrong, I loved a good argument. I'm not Mother Teresa, and Gary wasn't the Pope. But for me, I loved the job I did in law. And it's when I lost Gary, my uncle said, my word, Helen, you know, now is like the mouse now roars, because she was so quiet in the background, because Gary was the social butterfly, you know, he was the jokey, you know, and everything. And it's just really stuck with me. So that's what I see with a lot of women, is that you absorb, you absolutely have got the energy within you. It's just giving you that space and that opportunity to actually think, you know what, I can do this. As I've done, I've learned lots of things, because it was the unknown to me. And so the mouse does now roar. And for me, now I want to give them skills that I've learned to help other women to step up and use their pain for power, or their fear as power to esteem to what they want to be.
Yeah, I mean, such an incredible message, and one that I totally am behind, because it's the same for me. I went through a very tough divorce, and it came out of an abusive relationship, everything that follows that, like you, and turning that pain into your superpower, where you can then use that to create change, to help people, to make a positive difference. Like you said, for you, it's great therapy for us, right? And it actually helps other people too. And I think there's, you know, nobody better to be coached by than somebody like you, Helen, who's actually walked in those shoes, been really to hell and back, and experienced all that trauma, but come out stronger. And I think that's an empowering message for anyone to hear, that, you know, adversity sometimes can make you stronger, but it's how you do that. And having a coach like you by their side, I think, is just a phenomenal opportunity. So I'm super excited. Where can people find you, Helen?
Well, I've set up at the moment. I'm on social media. I'm Baroness Newlove. Oh, there's The Mouse Now Roars is on Instagram as well, and I'm Baroness Newlove is on Instagram, because I'm just in the crux of just now going to launch it. You know, either I want, you know, one-to-one clients or a group session. I just, you know, I'm really passionate, because I think, like yourself, you don't want anybody to go through pain. And I think also we think systems are there to protect us. Yeah. And, you know, we go to professionals who do their job, but it's when they leave us, you think, hang on a minute, you're talking about my life. You don't know me from Adam. And so I think that's what these systems are, where you're going to get many people who think, I can't do this because I've been told this. Where actually, if you're getting that lever to help them just step up a bit more, they realise they can do so much. And it's just having real people who have gone through it, and you'll see the passion, you'll see the pain, and they, that's what I want to help people and women to go through that, because unfortunately we don't have that. And yes, I'm in a political world, but actually I can't be doing with all this window dressing anymore. I want to help women get in that window, dress greatly with power, and walk through, step down, walk out that door and say, you know what, I can do this because I have it within me to do.
I love it. I absolutely love it. The Mouse Now rules on Instagram is where we can find you. Well, I mean, you've moved me. I've learned things from you today. I know that your message will have resonated with so many of my listeners. I'm just so grateful that you gave your time today, Helen, to come and join me, because you've been an absolutely fabulous guest. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Sarah. I just, it's great that we're both two women doing, what we've been through, but we're still there. And people think you're fine, but actually it's the engine within that keeps powering us to do that. And you never forget the pain, but you can create so much power for the good. And so I'm so delighted to be here talking to you, and thank you for inviting me. I've had a ball myself. We could do another session, couldn't we, with that so passionate about it. But thank you. You're doing this as well. It's not been easy as well.
Thank you. That means a lot, and I will definitely take you up on doing another session for sure. Definitely. Thank you. That's it for today's episode. Do head on over to the Mouse Now rules on Instagram to find out more about Helen's work and get coached by her. I can't think of anyone better to be by your side. And I look forward to you joining me on my next episode.
That's it for today's episode of Heartbreak to Happiness. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review to win a free ticket to one of Sara's virtual retreats. The retreats are a transformative combination of live webinars with Sara herself, coupled with empowering online video programs designed to help you cope better with your breakup and start feeling happy again. For more details, head on over to heartbreaktahappinesspodcast.com, where you can also get a copy of Sara's free gift. Thank you, and join us again on the next episode for another dose of Heartbreak to Happiness.